You can't stay out there. The snow isn't stopping, and you'll freeze before morning. The man on her porch looked like he hadn't expected anyone to open the door. He was tall, underdressed for February in Vermont, wearing a wool coat that had been good quality once, but was now soaked through at the shoulders. He had a laptop bag over one arm, and the look of someone who had spent so long solving large problems that a snowstorm had genuinely caught him off guard. Maeve Callison stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and the other holding the door, not all the way open, not closed. She was 29 years old and a single mother, and she had learned to read situations quickly. What she read in this one was, exhausted, lost, not dangerous. My car slid into the ditch about a half-mile back, he said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight from cold. My phone died. I saw your light. Maeve looked past him at the dark. The snow was coming sideways now, the way Vermont snow did when it meant business. The nearest neighbor was 3/4 of a mile through the trees. She opened the door the rest of the way. The couch folds out, she said. I'll get towels. His name was Soren Brigg. She learned this when he introduced himself, standing in her kitchen doorway, dripping slightly onto the mat she'd put down for exactly that purpose. He said it plainly, without the additional explanation that usually followed. No company name, no title, nothing that would have told her anything about who he was in the world outside her front door. She handed him a towel and a mug of tea, and pointed him toward the radiator. Maeve had lived in the farmhouse on Aldercroft Road for 4 years, since her daughter Bertie was born, and she'd moved back from Burlington to be closer to her mother, who had since passed and left her the house and a mortgage that Maeve was managing, just barely, steadily, with the particular determination of someone who had decided that barely and steadily was enough. She worked remotely, doing medical transcription, and in the summers she sold jam at the farmer's market, blackberry, cardamom pear, a blueberry vanilla that people drove 40 minutes for. She was not unhappy. She was tired in the way that good, hard lives make you tired, and she had learned to tell the difference. Bertie was asleep, 4 years old, with Maeve's dark hair and her own father's stubbornness, currently curled around a stuffed rabbit named Gerald in the back bedroom. Maeve made toast, because it was 11 at night, and there was a stranger in her kitchen, and toast felt like the right thing. They sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the snow pressing against the window glass, the radiator clicking. Soren wrapped both hands around the mug, and looked at her with the slightly stunned expression of someone who had been moving very fast, and that suddenly, involuntarily, stopped. You didn't have to do this, he said. No, Maeve agreed, but it's cold. He almost smiled. Most people wouldn't open the door. Most people haven't spent a February in Vermont. She buttered her toast. Besides, you look like someone who forgot that weather exists. This time he did smile, quick and genuine, and slightly self-deprecating. That's accurate. What were you doing out on Aldercroft in a snowstorm? He was quiet for a moment. Driving back from a meeting that ran late. I had a flight out of Burlington tomorrow morning. I thought I'd make it to the inn in Haskell. I miscalculated. The road gets bad fast up here. Locals know to watch the ridge. If the clouds sit low over the ridge before 4 p.m., you don't drive after dark. I'll remember that. You won't come back, she said, not unkindly, just honestly. He looked at her steadily. You don't know that. Bertie found him in the morning. Maeve was already in the kitchen when she heard the small feet on the hallway floor. And then the pause, the particular 4-year-old pause of encountering something unexpected. She came to the kitchen doorway. Soren was on the folded-out couch, sitting up, laptop open, already working. Bertie stood 3 feet away, Gerald the rabbit under one arm, studying him with frank scientific interest. You weren't here yesterday, Bertie said. No, Soren agreed. He had closed the laptop. I got stuck in the snow. Gerald gets scared of snow, she said, holding up the rabbit. I tell him it's just cold water. That's very logical, Soren said seriously. Bertie considered him for another moment, then climbed onto the opposite end of the couch and opened a picture book with the settled air of someone who had decided a situation was acceptable. Maeve stood in the doorway, watching this, and felt something she couldn't quite name, something warm and a little aching, the way it feels to see your child simply accepted by the world. The tow truck came at noon. The roads had been cleared by 10, but the earliest they could get to the ditch on Aldercroft was midday. Soren had missed his flight. He'd made calls, quiet, brief, efficient, from the kitchen while Maeve worked, and Bertie drew pictures of Gerald in various weather conditions. Before he left, he stood at the door with his dried coat and his laptop bag, and looked at the house, really looked, the way people sometimes do when they're committing something to memory. "Thank you," he said, genuinely. "I don't know how to." "Toast and a couch," Maeve said. "It wasn't a sacrifice." "It was a kindness," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." She didn't have an answer for that, so she just nodded and said, "Safe drive." And Bertie called from the living room, "Goodbye, Snowman," and he laughed, real and full, and walked to the waiting truck. 6 weeks passed. Then Maeve received a letter from her mortgage company. Not a bill, a formal notice of account closure. Paid in full. She read it 3 times standing at the kitchen counter, and then she sat down on the floor, because her legs simply decided that was where they needed to be. There was a separate note, handwritten, in an envelope tucked inside. "You opened your door in a snowstorm to someone you didn't know, and asked for nothing. I've spent 10 years building things meant to help people, and I've never done anything as straightforwardly good as what you did that night. This doesn't repay it, it just means that house is yours, the way it should have always been. Soren. P.S. Tell Bertie that Gerald was right to be cautious about snow." Maeve sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. The radiator clicked. Outside, the first real signs of March were showing at the edges of the yard. The snow pulling back from the fence posts. The faint brown suggestion of the garden returning. She thought about the night she'd opened the door. She hadn't thought about it much since. It had felt ordinary, because in her world ordinary meant someone needs something, you have it, you give it. That was just the math of being a person. She hadn't known he was Soren Brigg the inventor. She'd read about him once in a magazine at the dentist's office, something about sustainable infrastructure technology, a company valued in the billions, a man who had started working at 17 and hadn't stopped. She hadn't connected the exhausted, soaked man on her porch to any of that. She still didn't think of him that way. She thought of him the way Bertie did, as the snowman who took Gerald's meteorological cautions seriously. He called 3 days later. She'd found his number in the return address of the envelope. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "No," he said, and she could hear in the echo of her own word that he'd chosen it deliberately. "But it's the right thing." A pause settled between them. "How did you find the mortgage information?" "I have people who are good at finding things. I told them what I needed and why. I didn't look at anything else." Another pause. "I want you to know that." She believed him. She wasn't sure why, except that she'd spent a night across a kitchen table from him, and learned enough to trust the way he said things. "Bertie wants me to tell you, Gerald has now been informed that snow is just cold water," Maeve said. "He remains unconvinced, but is working on it." A long silence. Then he laughed, the same laugh she remembered, real, and full, and completely without performance. "I'd like to come back," he said. "Not as a guest in a snowstorm. Just to visit, if that's something you'd want." Maeve looked out the kitchen window. The yard was soft with late winter light, the fence posts visible now, the garden just beginning to remember itself. "The road's easier in spring," she said. "Watch the ridge anyway, old habit." "I'll remember this time." "You said that before." "I mean it this time," he said quietly. She believed that too. Kindness doesn't calculate. Maeve didn't open her door because she expected anything back. She opened it because a person was cold, and she was warm, and the distance between those two things was one unlocked door. She didn't know who he was. It didn't matter. What mattered was the snow, and the light, and a stranger who looked like he'd forgotten that weather exists. What came back to her wasn't a reward. It was just the world, doing what the world does when someone is generous without keeping score, finding a way, eventually, to be generous back. Open the door. That's all. Just open the door. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.